I've been learning engraving for about a year now, and I've been posting my progress on Instagram and YouTube and Reddit. And every time I post something, at least one person asks what my setup is. And so I thought I'd share it. It could be fun. Before I get started, let me just preface this by saying I'm a beginner. I'm still at the very early stages of learning how to engrave, and I have like the cheapest gear you can get. So that might actually be useful to somebody who's wanting to get started with hand engraving and wants to know what the cheap gear is. So let's get started. Right off the bat, we have here the ball vise. All right, this right here is what holds your work. You put your work on top of this, and that's what you'll engrave on. You'd use this if you're doing like hammer and chisel engraving, or the kind of engraving that I do with a pneumatic engraver. So let's jump to that. This was about $120 on Amazon. It has a key, that's how you open and close it. And then it comes with all of these attachments that you can throw on it to hold different, to hold things in different ways. If you were doing rings or whatever, you would use the ring holders and etc. So there's a bunch of different ways to hold stuff. About 120 bucks. Get you that. We'll kind of move that out of the way a little bit. They're heavy. That's the point. They're heavy. And you can like tighten up this turning function and loosen it, etc. If you get one of these dirt cheap ones, you're going to want to like take it apart and lubricate it all, clean it all out and lubricate it so that you get a nice, consistent, steady rotation. So after that is the graver itself. This is one that I got from a guy who makes them in Vietnam, maybe? I don't know. I'll link to his Instagram. That's the best way to find him. I think there might have been some IP overlap between someone in the US who makes them or whatever, so he had to take down his store a few times. I'll link to his Instagram. This is the engraver. It's got this pointy engraving bit at the end, and then the hand piece, as these are often referred to, comes apart, and there's a piston inside. And the air goes in here and bounces that piston back and forth and acts as the hammer. So you're effectively doing like hammer and chisel engraving, but all in one hand. You put your work in here and you use your left hand to turn it while your right hand does the engraving. Like so. After that you have, we'll come back to those sharp little tips. Those are called gravers. We'll come back to those in a few moments. Oh, the other half of the handpiece is the foot pedal. This is how you control how hard the air is flowing through it, which then moves the piston. You can get more expensive ones. I think this one was, I want to say $250, $275, maybe $300 for the foot, an air filter and regulator, and this. And that's $250 to $300 is dirt cheap for this kind of thing. If you were to go to one of the local US retailers, you'd be paying a lot more. But there's a lot of variation. And so a handpiece that may look like this, you may find a much higher quality one that kind of looks similar, or lower quality for that matter. So moving on from the handpiece. Some of the things that go along with it, you're going to need to sharpen your gravers. I have the Lindsay sharpening system, which are these templates. Now these templates, you screw your graver in here at a set distance, and then you use these sharpening stones and you slide it back and forth across these sharpening stones, working from rougher to smoother, and you end up with the final geometry of it. You actually go through two different shapes. This gives you the geometry up the shaft, and this larger one gives you the point geometry at the very end. For engraving, there's very specific geometries that work better than other ones. I'm not going to get into that. That's a little bit more complicated. And again, I'm a beginner, and I feel like, you know, if you need that advice, you should be going to somebody more knowledgeable to be learning about that kind of stuff. But this kit, this engraving kit, or the sharpening kit that comes with the stones and the templates, I want to say it was like 75 bucks. It came with like, or maybe it was 100 bucks. I got the one that had all the different shapes. So I've got like 5 or 6 different ones of these. And it really did immediately make my stuff better. Instead of me just eyeballing things, this immediately made it better. I had one of those ones that you just set the angle manually on a little piece of metal. It's hard to explain, but it was crappy, and this is better, much better. My tips are now consistent and sharp, which is what you need to be able to do this stuff. To be able to see what I'm doing, I wear these. Right now, I've got the 3-time magnification lenses in, and they make my eyeballs really giant, and they're fun, and they have a light on them. And you actually get very close to your material. It's hard to see here. Let me get this up here. When I'm engraving, I'm probably that close to it. And some people actually use a microscope. I think these were pretty cheap. They were probably like, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks, if that. But they kind of hurt my nose. So I'm thinking about getting a different style, the visor style, that are a little uglier, but might not hurt as bad. Some people use a microscope that they look in, but I don't have that. That's a whole other expensive thing. I use a jeweler's loupe to look at my tips. So whenever I'm done sharpening, I look up real close, and this lets me get super close and see if I've messed up that tip or if it needs a little bit more attention. These are dirt cheap. I think you can get them for like $5 for the little plastic ones. For work holding, I use Shape Lock or Thermomorph. This has a lot of different names. It's a plastic. It's a bunch of little beads. You can see them in there. You heat them up, and you can mold it like Play-Doh or silly putty. So I make a block of it that fits inside my vise here, and it holds my coins because other methods don't hold it as well or as flush. Like if you were using the pins of the vise or something, they stick up. And this stuff works really well, and you'll see a lot of people using something similar. And I use a hot air gun, of course, then to melt that, pop those out, put new ones in. Hot air guns, pretty awesome. All right, so let's get back to the gravers themselves. I have a variety of these. As you're working through a piece, you'll actually use a bunch of different tips, these little graver tips. You'll actually use a bunch of them, and that's where you get these different geometries are useful for different things. Like I have this one that's just a point, and that's for stippling. I have these two that are for details. This one that's flat, just for removing a bunch of material. For the graver tips, I actually really like these square ones that you can buy as blanks from GRS or on Amazon or something. But I've been doing this thing where I bought a whole bunch of carbide rods. These are just little carbide rods, you can see. They're like 2 or 3 millimeter, I don't remember. And I just snap them in half, and I grind a flat spot so I can index them so that every time I sharpen them, I'm sharpening them the same direction. And these actually work pretty well and are a whole lot cheaper than these, but it's harder to get them consistent in between sharpenings because they are round. And I'm not sure how well this carbide material will hold up as opposed to like the high-speed steel or some of the other materials that you can get for your gravers. Aside from that, just standard things like, you know, some really fine sandpaper and some black enamel paint. That's really it as far as the tools that I use for engraving. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. See you next time.